games that are better on their hardest difficulties, and by that we can be pretty flexible. Maybe like they're an alternate difficulty, like a survival mode. Rob, you've done a couple videos last year about this for a couple of different games, so I'll let you start it off. But essentially, just games that you can enjoy more when they're at their hardest.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because dating back to the Fallout 4 survival mode, sometimes a game, I feel like, for example, Fallout, where later in the game you become so overpowered, and I think you hear that even maybe with Dishonored. I think Scott had the same sentiment, where like when the game just gets almost boring, where you feel like so overpowered, like. That's kind of like a solution, is to have a survival mode or play the game differently with like no powers, right, for Dishonored. Fallout 4 was one of those games where it was like, I have 130 stims at the ready. There is never going to be a moment where I'm
Power armor.
Yeah, power
really
armor.
Good companion.
Like, I'm just plowing through this game.
You don't feel like a survivor anymore, which I think the early stages of the game do really well.
Right, and that's so Fallout, right? So you kind of lose that, and that's why survival mode was so cool. Was it just in so many areas just limited like how much you could take with you? So instead of adding weight to stims means I can't take 130. I can only take like maybe 5. Also, when I use them, they are not immediate. They don't replenish my health immediately, so it's like a slow burn.
Yeah.
So when you're in combat,
so they're not get out of jail free cards. They're
right.
really just a resort when you have to get out of a fight, or at least just to gradually while you're getting wounded still.
There were just so many things in that mode that like really like just made the game so much better and made everything seem so dire. Like being in a fight and having the only way you can save a game is by sleeping in a bed. So it's like crap. I haven't saved. I mean, it's pretty brutal, but it's like I haven't saved in an hour. I'm in this fight. I'm about to die. Your heart just like picks up, and we talked about adrenaline high. Like it was cool to like have that again. And I, as far as last year goes, so many games were doing that. You know what I mean? It felt like every other month was like, oh, Far Cry has a survival mode. Oh, Division now has a survival mode, which I haven't played yet. Division, that one sounds pretty fun, actually.
Yeah, it's a totally different game. Well,
yeah,
that's hyperbolic. It's very, very different. It's the same game map. Did you play it, Kelly?
Mm-mm.
Did you play The Division much?
No.
I barely did either. But from what I played more survival than I did the base game because I like it that much more. You're fighting to get to the center. It actually feels, I think it's kind of along what you're saying with Fallout 4, the Boston wasteland. It feels like it fits more in the world. This post-apocalyptic New York City, winter, like this virus-induced winter. And actually, right now, another example that I didn't write down, I want to get to. Jacob Decker is a big fan of The Last of Us, as a lot of people are. But someone else, Hans Nell, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that in the YouTube chat, said Last of Us grounded mode, and I totally agree. For the same reason.
I haven't even heard of that.
Oh yeah, for the same reason, it's much harder, like in terms of how much. It's more realistic in terms of how much damage Joel can take before he dies or at least gets wounded. Crafting their much sparser items. You have to manage your supplies much more fastidiously.
I love the resource management aspects.
Right, and I think the grounded mode makes it better because you're worrying so much more in the long run. Like, because replaying the game, you're like, okay, shit, I have this stuff coming up in Pittsburgh, or I know in Iowa this is going to go down, and I want like enough items for this to be manageable, and it fits within the world, right? Again, it's a post-apocalyptic world where you're just coming across these household items that you're fashioning into shivs or ammo.
Yeah, and I like that it forces you to pay more attention, because I mean, if you're replaying the game for a third or fourth time, because I love Last of Us, like I always feel like playing it. What's coming up, and it makes a lot more sense to have to plan far ahead. I feel like I do that in games anyway. Like a lot of games where I'm like, oh, I won't use this potion because what if I need it in 5 hours and then I never use it? Whereas on Grounded, you do end up using everything you have because you have so little, and I think that makes the experience a lot better.
Right, for sure. Same with The Division, same with Fallout 4. It kind of just feels more at home within the world they build.
Same with even Resident Evil, right? Like the amount of bullets you have, like 5 bullets.
That's all you got.
Yeah. Resident Evil 4 on harder difficulties, despite how action-oriented that game is, the item management is much more enticing on harder difficulty, I think, and trying to manage it.
Right. And even things like Titanfall, we've talked about, where I played that on normal. I mean, off the bat, like that game was just way too easy on its normal mode. But you put it on master, you are approaching like these areas. That in that game, there's like those ticks.
Yeah.
I forget, that's like the second or third map where these ticks are just coming at you.
Spider bots kind of thing.
You're just constantly running, and that game is very much not a cover-based shooter. It's a wall-running shooter.
This mode is different than the other games we're talking about in that it encourages you to play the game in a very different way than you might other shooters.
And I would argue, like, in the way that it should be played, which is like keep moving. The game is the game is trying to reinforce the idea that, like, it says it even as a death screen, like, keep moving, and that's how you play multiplayer. So having played like half of that game on master, I still want to beat it. Kind of just clicked for me, was like, I just got to keep moving, like,
right,
which was something that I didn't have to do in the normal mode of the game. So it's just looking at a different approach of like making a game harder, like can strengthen or reinforce its like core mechanics or like how the game is meant to be played. And I found that interesting.
Yeah, you did videos on both Titanfall 2 and Fallout 4 Survival Mode, both of which are saying kind of this is the way this game should be played. Do you think these games would both be better on these difficulties for the first playthrough, or just something you should try once you like beat it?
For Titanfall, I would say. And then, I mean, I guess both of these I would recommend like later, unless you're like really great at shooters or whatnot. With Titanfall, I would recommend it, at least like at the second hardest mode. Fallout was, I could not imagine playing that game off the bat, like in the beginning, with survival mode. Like it's so brutal. Like already, it's like you have nothing.
Yeah.
No stims, nothing, and you just step outside. Like I feel like a rad roach would just like bite your head off, and you'd be like, "Well, fuck this."
Yeah, for sure. I do want to call it a couple before we get to Callie. If you had any you wanted to mention,
I had one that's sort of cheating. If I can bring it up.
do it.
I really want to shout out Undertale's genocide run.
Okay.
If you aren't familiar with Undertale, there's several. I think there's like 7 or so endings. But if you play through a first playthrough and just play normally, you get like a pretty normal ending. And if you play genocide, where you kill literally everything in the game, there's this phenomenal final boss that it took me 2 weeks to beat. I played every night for 2 weeks.
Jesus.
To memorize. It's the combat in Undertale is like sort of bullet hell. So I played every night. I would come home from work and play. And I finally beat it, and it was like the most satisfying thing I've ever done. And the mode itself, I mean, it's not technically a mode, it's just like you can choose to play the game that way, which is why this is cheating a little bit. But I think it really enhances the point of that mode, which is Undertale is a lot about personhood and agency, and that's a lot of what the game's about, and it really drives that home really well, especially if you play this a second time. So this is another one that I think you wouldn't want to play it for the first time doing that, but I would recommend, like, if you've already beaten Undertale, playing through it again, killing literally everything.
That's super coincidental and fortunate. I actually just finally got Undertale on Steam, so maybe I'll check that out. If I like the game enough to do a second playthrough, maybe I'll try that out. I did want to talk about Zero, again, sorry if I'm butchering this, but Zero HXCO7 mentioned Metro 2033's Ranger mode. Metro Last Light has a similar difficulty, which that's very much a similar vein as the games we were talking about in terms of the survival being a lot more intense, and you have to be a lot more careful, fastidious with your items. I love Metro Last Light. I like 2033, but after playing Last Light, 2033 kind of pales in comparison. I want to talk about Far Cry Primal. They brought out a survival mode as well. And you know how kind of when the sun goes down in that game, that's when the predators come out, and you want to have a fire or at least like a torch to kind of ward wolves away. But this is very much the same thing. You don't have as much of an interface, so it feels more like you're just kind of in this world. The cold is much more damaging to you once you go into the northern sections of the game. I think this game was a little bit forgettable because it was sort of along the Far Cry 3-4. It was a Far Cry 3-4 clone just in the Stone Age. But I think they actually made good use of it, especially with the survival mode. It was much harder to... It felt just as brutal as the story was trying to tell you the game was, as opposed to the first playthrough, which I still really liked, actually. But I actually might recommend playing this game for the first time in the survival mode, because especially if you played Far Cry 3 and 4 and looking for something truly different to feel like this caveman surviving in this dangerous world where like the animals in the environment are almost more of a threat to you than the humans are. I think people, if you have not played Far Cry Primal yet, which, you know, it didn't really get a lot of Game of the Year or anything, or any accolades or awards, but I think it is an underrated game, and I think people should play it in survival mode.
In that mode, that sounds interesting, like the whole night aspect, because that was something about that game where it seemed missed, because again, if I remember correctly, you could just warp back to a campfire and sleep out the night.
Yeah.
Did they remove that? If they remove that, that'd be cool.
I believe fast travel is not in survival mode.
That's cool.
Right.
Then you're like
you see the sun going
right.
down.
That would be that's
You're
neat.
totally right. They did remove that. I remember that.
That
happening.
needed to happen.
That is because then you're like you hear a saber-tooth kind of like howling, right?
Right.
Not howling. What do they do? Screeching,
Sure.
roaring. Meow. There's a saber-tooth swooping down to grab you.
Right.
And yes, I actually would tell people to play. This is one of those few games I would say play this on the hardest difficulty first, because I think you'll appreciate this game more. It sets itself apart from Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 a little more. Last one I wanted to mention, XCOM 2's Iron Man and XCOM Enemy Unknown's Iron Man mode. This is the perma-death mode. I don't think you're playing XCOM the right way if you don't have permadeath enabled. If you want to reload a save and try to redo something, I don't think you're getting the full impact of that game. XCOM 2 was one of my favorite games last year. I've never played an XCOM game. I played an XCOM one playthrough out of my 60 playthroughs of XCOM games, not with permadeath. And I think that's because you don't feel the impact of losing someone, just much like Fire Emblem. You won't feel the impact of that unless you're actually losing these people for good. You start getting attached to these snipers, not because like their character models or their dialogue, cheesy dialogue, but because you're like, oh shit, I just lost my Brazilian sniper who had like 65 confirmed kills. Her weapon was outfitted really well. I lost that. I lost all her good armor. Like you actually feel it, and then there's a genuine like disappointment and like regret knowing like if I just thrown this flashbang at this point or killed this muton before this happened, it like crushes you.
That's really smart. Like that's a really good pick.
I would actually say XCOM. Same thing. XCOM should be played on Iron Man. I don't think you're playing XCOM if you're not on Iron Man mode.
That reminds me, Fire Emblem on classic mode.
Yeah,
you're not playing Fire Emblem if you can't lose your potential husband and then cry. I don't think that counts.
I've been waiting to get into Fire Emblem games. I played Awakening a little bit, but sadly I did not get more into it. But are you more a fan of Fates, or we talked about this before?
We talked about it. Yeah, I think so. But broken record, I guess. But
sorry, Monroe192 said real life has permadeath. I play games for the escape. That's a valid concern.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, maybe if you're new to Fire Emblem, I would say play it on the not permadeath.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm the kind of person I always reset a game if something I don't like happens. And so my challenge to myself is not to do that.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing where it's like, oh, I lost this person that had these skills that I really needed. And like now I have to go on and figure out how to go on without that.
Sure.
Or my wife who died. No.
Yeah. It's because Fire Emblem, once you get a little farther in the game, the meta becomes more about like building relationships and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you like, it's sort of weird where you have to like kind of breed people for better children who can be soldiers.
Genetic engineering.
I mean,
cool.
Sure. But I do think a lot of people care about the relationship aspect in Fire Emblem. So that does have that emotional effect in addition to the disappointment of like, oh, I lost my best healer or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, I like because you could play like XCOM 2 on easy but still have Iron Man mode enabled, or rookie and still have Iron Man 2. So the actual enemies will be a little easier, but you still lose people. So I think even if you're playing for the first time, go on rookie but set Iron Man mode. I could be mistaken about this, but I think like rookie has Iron Man mode. Either way, I'm just like talking about XCOM 2, but I'm going to shut up now. So those are the ones we wanted to mention, but if anybody watching right now wants to throw a few more in the chat, we've seen like The Last of Us, Metro 2033, both great picks. Leave your thought in the comments and we'll peruse them and try to get back to you. Thanks.